Neighbor cut down my 80-year-old trees for a view. I took his house. I need to tell you about 5 trees. Not just any trees. 5 black walnut giants that my old man planted with his own hands back in 1947, right after he came home from the Pacific. He never talked much about the war, but he talked about those trees like they were his kids. Maybe they were easier to love than me. I don't know. What I do know is that those trees became the backbone of my entire life, and I never even realized it until they were gone. Let me paint you a picture of what I had. My property sits on about 2 acres in what used to be farmland outside a mid-sized city. Nothing fancy. Just a simple ranch house my dad built himself, one board at a time. The kind of place where you can still hear crickets at night instead of sirens. The 5 black walnuts formed this perfect arc along the eastern edge of my property, standing like sentinels between my house and the hill that rises up behind it. They were massive. I am talking trunks so thick that 3 grown men couldn't link hands around them. Canopies that spread out like green umbrellas, each one covering an area the size of a basketball court. Those trees did more than look pretty. They were my climate control system. See, I am an engineer by training. Retired now, but the habits stick. I measure things. I calculate. I know for a fact that those 5 trees dropped the temperature around my house by 15 degrees in the summer. 15 degrees. That shade cut my July cooling bill in half every single year. That is the difference between an electric bill of $200 and one that is pushing $600 or $700 when the heat really cranks up. Over summer, those trees saved me thousands. Over the 30 years I lived there, they probably saved me enough to buy a decent car, but it was more than money. It was the shade, the dappled light that came through the leaves in the morning, the sound of wind moving through all that foliage, like the earth itself was breathing. My wife used to sit out there with her coffee every morning before she passed. She would just sit and listen. She said it was better than any church service. So yeah, I love those trees. They were family. Everything was fine until Brad showed up. Brad, whoever the hell. Mid-30s, all teeth and hair gel, driving a Range Rover that probably cost more than my entire annual retirement income. He bought the property uphill from me about 8 months ago. Not to live in, mind you, to flip. That is what these people do now. They buy land, slap together the biggest, gaudiest house they can manage without it actually falling down, and then sell it to some sucker with more money than sense. The house he built was obscene. A McMansion in the truest sense of the word. For 1,000 square feet of vinyl siding and fake stone veneer. Columns out front that were trying way too hard to look Greek. A 3-car garage for a guy who lived alone. The whole thing looked like a wedding cake designed by someone who had never actually seen a wedding cake, but had heard them described over a bad phone connection. I watched it go up over 6 months. Watched the crews cut corners. Watched the cheap materials get unloaded. I am an engineer. I know construction. That house was garbage wrapped in a bowl, and Brad was planning to sell it for $3 million. $3 million for garbage. But hey, not my problem, right? He stayed on his side of the property line. I stayed on mine. Live and let live. That is the code out here. Then one Saturday morning in June, Brad came walking down the hill. I was out front, doing some weeding in the garden. I saw him coming from about 50 yards away. Boat shoes, salmon-colored shorts, a polo shirt so aggressively pastel it hurt to look at. He had his phone in one hand, and a coffee cup from some overpriced chain in the other. He was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes. The kind salesmen practice in mirrors. He called out to me while he was still 20 feet away, all friendly and casual. Told me his name, stuck out his hand, did the whole howdy neighbor routine. His handshake was firm, practiced, the kind of handshake they teach you in business school. I shook it because that is what you do, but something in my gut was already whispering that this was not a social call. We made small talk for a minute. Weather, property values, the usual noise. Then he got to the point. He needed a favor. A small favor, really? No big deal. He just needed me to cut down my trees. I actually laughed. I thought he was joking. He was not joking. Brad explained it to me like I was a child. See, his house had this amazing view of the river valley to the east. Panoramic, breathtaking, the kind of view that adds $500,000 to the asking price. There was just one tiny problem. My trees were in the way. They blocked about 60% of the view from his main living room and master bedroom. Potential buyers would walk in, look out the window, and see a wall of green instead of that money shot vista. So he needed the trees gone. He said it like he was asking me to move a trash can. Casual, reasonable, just a neighborly request between two property owners. I stood there, bent over my garden, dirt under my nails, and I looked up at this kid. This child in his expensive shoes standing on land he had owned for less than a year, asking me to destroy something my father had planted before he was born, asking me to erase a piece of my family history, so he could squeeze an extra few $100,000 out of some stockbroker looking for a weekend retreat. I told him no. Simple as that. No. His smile flickered. Just for a second, I saw something cold move behind his eyes. But then the smile came back, wider than before, and he shifted gears. He got it, he said. He totally understood. These were old trees. Beautiful trees. He respected that. He really did. But maybe I had not considered all the angles. For instance, old trees like that, they drop branches. Lots of branches. What if one of those branches fell on his house? What if it damaged his roof? That could be a liability issue for me. Real legal headaches. Expensive headaches. I told him the trees were healthy. Told him I had an arborist come out every 2 years to inspect them. Told him there was no liability because there was no danger. He nodded slowly, like he was thinking it over. Then he pivoted again. What if he paid me? Not a lot. Just enough to make it worth my while. Say $10,000? I could cut down the trees, keep the wood for firewood, or sell it, and pocket $10,000 for an afternoon of work. Everybody wins. I told him the trees were not for sale. I told him they would never be for sale. I told him that those trees were older than both of us, and they would be standing long after we were both dead, and that was the end of the discussion. His smile was gone now. He looked at me the way you look at a stain on your carpet. An inconvenience. Something that needed to be cleaned up. He opened his mouth to say something else, something I suspect would not have been nearly as polite. But then he stopped himself, took a breath. The smile came back, different this time, softer. He apologized, said he came on too strong, said he got focused on business sometimes and forgot about the human element. He was sorry. He did not mean to offend me. And then he told me about his grandfather. His grandfather, Brad said, had a walnut tree in his backyard. Just one, but it was huge, ancient. As he spoke, he reached out and placed his palm flat against the rough bark of the nearest walnut, his fingers tracing the deep grooves like he was reading Braille. The gesture was so reverent, so genuine-looking, that I felt my guard drop another notch. Brad used to visit him when he was a kid, and his grandpa had hung a tire swing from one of the lower branches. Brad said he spent whole summers on that swing, pumping his legs and flying through the air, feeling like he could touch the sky. He said that tree was one of his best memories of childhood. He said when his grandpa died, the new owners of the house cut it down to put in a pool, and it broke his heart. He looked at my trees with something that almost looked like sadness, his hand still resting on the bark. He said he understood now. He said he got it. History matters. Roots matter. Some things are more important than money. He said he would find another way. Maybe he could work with an architect, redesign some windows, create a different focal point for the view. Maybe the trees could even be a selling point. A mature landscape. Privacy. Shade. People pay for that kind of thing. He said he would not touch the trees. Gentleman's word. And then he stuck out his hand again. I am 58 years old. I have seen a lot of handshakes in my life. Business deals. Treaties. Truces. A handshake used to mean something. It used to be a bond, a promise, a contract signed in flesh and honor. My father taught me that. He said a man's word was the only currency that really mattered, and a handshake was how you spent it. So when Brad looked me in the eye, told me about his grandfather's tree, and gave me his word that my trees were safe, I believe him. I shook his hand. He walked back up the hill, and I went back to my weeding. I felt good. Felt like I had navigated a tricky situation with a new neighbor and come out the other side with mutual respect intact. I even felt a little guilty for judging him so harshly at first. Maybe he was not such a bad guy after all. Maybe he just needed a reminder about what really mattered. The next day, I got a call from my sister in Ohio. She was not doing well. Her husband had left her. She was struggling with her health, and she needed someone to come stay with her for a few days, help her sort through some things, just be there. I had not seen her in over a year. We were never that close growing up, but she was still family, and family shows up when it counts. I told her I would drive out. 3 days, maybe 4 at most. I spent the next morning packing a bag and making arrangements. Called the neighbor's kid to feed my dog. Put a hold on the mail. Checked the weather forecast for the drive. All the little details you take care of when you're going to be away from home. Before I left, I walked out to the trees. I do not know why. Maybe some part of me knew. Maybe some ancient animal instinct was screaming a warning I was too civilized to hear. I stood there under the canopy, looking up at the branches, at the way the light filtered down to the leaves in shafts of gold and green. They were beautiful. They were perfect. They were safe. I got in my truck around noon, backed out of the driveway. The trees filled my rearview mirror as I rolled down the gravel drive toward the main road. I remember thinking how lucky I was. Lucky to have this place. Lucky to have this peace. Lucky to have something my father had built with his own hands still standing, still strong, still sheltering me from the harshness of the world. I remember thinking that some things last forever if you take care of them. I remember thinking I had nothing to worry about. I drove east toward Ohio, toward my sister, toward 3 days of family obligations and difficult conversations. The trees disappear behind me, swallowed by distance in the curve of the road. I turned on the radio, found a classic rock station, settled in for the long drive. I drove away thinking I had made a friend. I didn't know I had just shaken hands with an executioner, but I was about to find out. The drive back from Ohio took 6 hours. 6 hours of highway, rest stops, bad coffee, and classic rock stations fading in and out as I crossed state lines. My sister was doing better. We had talked through some things, made some plans. I felt good about the visit. Productive. The kind of good tired you get when you have done something meaningful. I pulled off the interstate around 4 in the afternoon. Took the county road that winds through what used to be tobacco fields, now mostly subdivisions and storage facilities. The sky was clear, bright, one of those late spring days where the sun feels like it is trying to prove something. I turned onto my road, and that is when I noticed the light. It hit me wrong immediately. The angle of it, the intensity. For 30 years, my driveway had been a tunnel of dappled shade in the afternoon. The sun would filter through the walnut canopy in these soft, golden columns that made the gravel look like it was glowing. It was one of my favorite things about coming home. That transition from bright road to cool shadow, like passing through a curtain into somewhere safe. But now the sun was in my eyes. Harsh, direct, unfiltered. I actually squinted, had to pull down the visor. Something in my chest went tight. I turned into my driveway, and the rawness intensified. The light was everywhere, flooding my property like someone had torn the roof off the world. Shadows that should have been long and soft were short and hard. Everything looked overexposed, washed out, like a photograph of the contrast turned up too high. And then I smelled it. Fresh cut wood. That sweet, almost chemical smell that comes from sawdust and sap and raw lumber. For a carpenter, that is the smell of creation, of work, of something being built. For me, it was the smell of a crime scene. There was something else underneath it. Gasoline, chainsaw exhaust, that acrid petroleum stink that clings to your throat and makes your eyes water. The combination made my stomach lurch. I have smelled a lot of things in my life, some of them pretty bad, but this was different. This was personal. For a carpenter, fresh cut would smells like work. For me, right then, it smelled like a morgue. It smelled like death. I had to fight the urge to gag. I pulled up to where I usually park, and I just sat there for a second, hands still on the wheel, engine running. My brain was trying to process what my eyes were seeing, but it was like trying to run software on the wrong operating system. Nothing was computing. The trees were gone. All 5 of them. Gone. I do not mean pruned. I do not mean trimmed. I mean erased, cut down to the ground, and hauled away like they had never existed, where there had been 5 massive black walnuts, each one a living monument to 80 years of growth. There are now just stumps, white stumps, pale as bone, sticking up out of the torn earth like grave markers. The stumps were all that was left, flat circles of exposed wood, maybe 3 feet across each one, the growth rings visible like fingerprints, like evidence. I killed the engine, got out of the truck. The ground was destroyed. You know how a construction site looks after the heavy equipment rolls through? Torn up, gouged, tire tracks 2 feet deep, cutting through what used to be grass and wildflowers. The earth was raw and wounded, subsoil exposed in places where topsoil had been scraped away. I could see the path where they had dragged the trunks up the hill toward Brad's property. A scar in the land, a trail of destruction 30 feet wide. I walked over to the nearest stump. My legs felt strange, too light, like I was floating, like I might just drift away if I did not concentrate on staying connected to the ground. I stood over that stump and I stared down at it. 82 rings. I counted them later. 82 years of growth. 82 springs of new leaves and 82 autumns of letting them go. 82 years of standing in one spot, doing the quiet, patient work of being a tree, erased in an afternoon. I heard a door slam up the hill, footsteps on gravel. I did not turn around. I knew who it was. I could feel him coming, could feel that particular brand of smug confidence that some people mistake for success. Brad walked down the hill toward me like he was strolling through a park. He was dressed like he was going to a country club, bright white polo shirt, khaki pants with a perfect crease, Italian loafers that probably cost more than my truck payment, not work boots, not jeans, loafers on a construction site, the kind of shoes you wear when you have never had to do real work in your life. He had a drink in his hand, some kind of smoothie or protein shake, in a clear plastic cup, bright green. He was sipping it through a straw. He stopped about 10 feet away from me, smiled, that same practice smile from before, but now I could see it for what it was, empty, performative, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes because there is nothing behind the eyes to reach. He greeted me like we were old friends running into each other at the grocery store. Casual, friendly, asked me how my trip was, said he hoped everything was okay with my sister. I just stared at him. He looked around at the destruction, at the stumps, at the torn earth, and he nodded like he was admiring a job well done. Told me his crew had been very professional, very efficient, in and out in 2 days. Minimal disruption. Minimal disruption. I felt something cold settle in my chest. It was not anger. Not yet. Anger is hot. This was colder. Heavier, like ice forming in my lungs. I asked him why. Just that one word. Why? He looked confused for a second, like he genuinely did not understand the question. Then his face cleared, and he did this little laugh, this dismissive chuckle. He told me not to be dramatic. He said he knew I was upset, and he got it. He really did. But I needed to look at this rationally. Rationally. He explained it to me like I was a child learning basic arithmetic. He had a buyer, a serious buyer, cash offer, no inspection, no contingencies, ready to close in 3 weeks. The buyer loved the house but wanted the view. That was non-negotiable. The view was worth an extra $200,000 on the asking price. $200,000. He said he had done the math, looked into the regulations. The county fine for unauthorized tree removal on someone else's property was $500 per tree. 5 trees. $2,500 total. He rounded up to $3,000 just to be safe. $3,000 to make $200,000. That was a profit margin of over 6,000%. He seemed genuinely proud of his calculation, like he had figured out some brilliant loophole. He sipped his smoothie and waited for me to acknowledge his genius. I asked him about his word, his promise, his grandfather's tree, and the handshake, and the gentleman's agreement. He waved that away like I was bringing up something embarrassing from a high school yearbook. Said that was before he knew about the buyer, before the numbers changed. He told me I needed to understand that this was not personal. This was business. This was just math. Just math. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a check, waved it at me like a white flag. $15,000. Made out to me. He said that was more than fair compensation. More than generous, actually. He said I could keep all the wood from the trees for firewood or sell it to a lumber mill. Black walnut is valuable. Plus the 15 grand for my trouble and the inconvenience. He told me to use the money to plant some nice shrubs, maybe a few ornamental trees. Something that would not block anyone's view. He held out the check. I looked at it, looked at his manicured hand, his perfect nails, the gold watch on his wrist that probably cost more than my truck. I looked at the stumps. I looked back at him, and something shifted. You know how a gear clicks into place in a machine? How all the teeth line up, and suddenly everything engages, and the power flows through, and the work begins. That is what happened in my head. All the anger, all the shock, all the grief, it all crystallized into something else. Something colder, clearer, more precise. He said it was just business, just math. And he was right. It was math. He just did not know how bad he was at it. I have spent my entire adult life working with numbers. I was a structural engineer for 35 years. I calculated load-bearing capacities and stress factors and failure points. I modeled worst-case scenarios and built in safety margins and made sure that the things people built did not fall down and kill them. Numbers are not abstract to me. They are tools, weapons if you need them to be. And Brad had just handed me a weapon while standing in a building with no foundation. I did not take the check. I looked him in the eye, and I told him he was right. This was math. This was business. This was about numbers. And he was very, very bad at math. His smile faltered, just a little, just enough for me to see the first crack in the facade. He asked me what I meant by that. I told him he would find out. Then I turned around and walked toward my house. He called after me, told me I was being unreasonable, told me I was overreacting, told me the check was a one-time offer. If I did not take it now, the deal was off the table. I did not turn around. I did not say another word. I just walked. My dog was waiting for me at the door, tail wagging, happy to see me home. I scratched his ears, told him he was a good boy. He had no idea what had happened. No idea that his favorite spot under the trees, where he used to lay in the shade on hot afternoons, was gone. He would figure it out eventually. Dogs always do. They notice when things change, when safe places stop being safe. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The house was dark, cool, quiet, all the things I usually loved about coming home. But now it felt different. The quiet felt fragile, temporary, like the moment before a storm breaks. I stood in my kitchen for a minute, just breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow, controlled, the way they teach you to do when you are trying not to lose your composure, when you are trying not to scream or cry or punch a hole in the wall. But I did not want to scream. I did not want to cry. I wanted something else entirely. I walked over to my desk, opened the drawer where I keep the important stuff. Warranties, insurance papers, property documents. I pulled out the folder with my deed and survey maps, set it on the desk. Then I grabbed my phone, my notebook, a pen, my camera. I did not sit down. I stood there, looking at the tools I had just assembled, these small ordinary objects. A phone, a pen, a camera. They felt like weapons now. Brad thought this was about money. About a quick score and a clever calculation. He thought he could quantify everything, reduce a lifetime of memory and meaning and history to a dollar figure on a check. He was wrong. This was not about money anymore. This was about accountability. This was about showing someone who thought they could calculate their way out of consequences that some equations have variables they had not accounted for. Brad wanted to play with numbers. Fine, let me show him what real math looks like. I picked up my phone and opened the camera app. Time to document everything. Every stump, every gouge in the earth, every piece of evidence. I was going to measure and photograph and record until I had built a case so airtight that not even the best lawyer money could find a crack in it. Brad thought he was good at math, thought he had figured out the angles, thought the fine was $2,500 and the profit was $200,000, and that was the end of the equation. But he forgot to carry the one. He forgot to account for treble damages and replacement costs and lost property value, and a dozen other variables that were about to make his beautiful calculation explode in his face. I was not going to yell. I was not going to threaten. I was not going to do anything dramatic or stupid or emotional. I was going to do what I have always done. I was going to solve a problem with precision and patience and the methodical application of the rules. Brad had given me his word and then broken it. He had calculated that honor was worth less than profit, that promises were optional, that the law was just a minor cost of doing business. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was. He was about to discover that some costs cannot be calculated in advance, that some debts come due in ways you did not see coming, that some equations eat you alive. I sat down at my desk, opened my notebook to a fresh page, wrote the date at the top, drew a line underneath it, and then I started making a list. The first thing I did was document everything. Not later, not after I calmed down. Right then, while my hands were still shaking and my chest was still tight, and I could still taste bile in the back of my throat. I went back outside with my camera, a tape measure, and a clipboard. My dog followed me, confused about why we were going back out so soon. I started with the stumps, photographed each one from multiple angles, wide shots to show the location, close-ups to show the clean cuts where the chainsaws had done their work. I measured the diameter of each stump, counted the rings, made notes. Stump 1, 42 inches across, 82 growth rings, eastern edge of property line. Stump 2, 38 inches, 79 rings, 10 feet north of Stump 1. I worked methodically, clinically, like I was processing a crime scene, which I guess I was. Every measurement written down, every detail recorded. The engineer in me took over, which was good, because the human in me wanted to sit down and scream. Then I went inside and started digging through old photos. I have boxes of them. Never got around to digitizing everything. Pictures from 30 years of living in this house. Birthday parties, Christmases, random Tuesday afternoons. And in the background of so many of them, there they were, my trees, the witnesses to 3 decades of life. I found a picture from 1995, me and my wife standing in the backyard. Behind us, the 5 walnuts in full summer leaf, massive and green and alive. I scanned it with my phone, added it to my evidence folder. Found another from 2003, my daughter's high school graduation party. The trees were even bigger. You could see how thick the trunks had gotten, how wide the canopy spread. Each photo was a timestamp, proof of what had been there, proof of what had been taken. By the time I finished, it was after midnight. I had a folder with 47 photographs, detailed measurements, property surveys, and tax records showing the trees as part of the assessed value of my land. I had built a timeline, a case, a weapon, but I was not a lawyer. I needed someone who knew how to use this weapon properly. The next morning, I called Tom Harrison. Tom and I served together a lifetime ago. Different branches, same war, same understanding of how the world actually works. After he got out, he went to law school, became the kind of lawyer who does not advertise on bus benches, the kind you call when you are serious. I told him what happened, did not editorialize, did not exaggerate, just facts. He listened in silence. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. Then he told me to come to his office immediately and bring everything I had. Tom's office is in an old building downtown with paneling, law books that actually get used, no marble floors or abstract art, just a desk, some chairs, and 30 years of knowing how to hurt people legally. I spread my documentation across his desk, the photos, the measurements, the property records. He went through it all slowly, making notes on a yellow legal pad. His expression never changed, but I saw his jaw tighten when he looked at the before and after pictures. Finally, he sat back in his chair and looked at me. He told me I had a case, a strong case. He asked me what I wanted out of this. I told him I wanted Brad to understand that some equations have consequences, that some costs compound in ways you do not see coming. I told him I wanted justice, not revenge, but I would be lying if I said the two did not overlap in my mind. Tom nodded slowly. Then he asked me if I had ever heard of treble damages. Treble damages, triple damages, a legal multiplier that exists in some states for willful and malicious property destruction. Not an accident, not negligence. Willful, malicious, the kind of thing where someone knows they are wrong and does it anyway because they think the profit will exceed the penalty. Tom explained it like he was teaching a class. In our state, if you can prove that property destruction was intentional and done with conscious disregard for the owner's rights, the court can award 3 times the actual damages. It is meant to punish people who try to calculate their way around the law. People who treat fines as the cost of doing business. People exactly like Brad. But first, we needed to establish the actual damages. The replacement value of what was taken. That is where it got interesting. Tom picked up his phone and called someone. Did not tell me who. Just said he needed an arborist. A good one. Someone who could testify in court if needed. The arborist showed up the next afternoon. His name was David. Late 50s. Drove a truck with more equipment than a small laboratory. He walked my property for an hour, examining the stumps, taking core samples, measuring, calculating, photographing everything from angles I had not even thought of. I stood there and watched him work, watched him shake his head, watched him mutter to himself. At one point, he just stopped and stared at the largest stump for a full minute, without saying anything. When he finally came back to where I was standing, his face was grim. He told me that what happened here was not just illegal, it was obscene, a crime against nature. Black walnut, he explained, is not just any tree. It is premium hardwood. The kind of wood that makes fine furniture and gun stocks and museum pieces. A mature black walnut can be worth tens of thousands of dollars just for the timber. But that is if you harvest it properly, carefully, with respect for what it is. What Brad did was butcher them, cut them down, drag them up the hill, probably damaged half the wood in the process. Wasted value that had taken 8 decades to create. But the real issue, David said, was not the timber value. It was the replacement value. You cannot just plant a new 80-year-old tree. It does not work that way. If you want to replace a mature tree, you have to transplant one. Find a specimen of similar size, which is almost impossible, then excavate it without killing it. Transport it on specialized equipment. Bring in cranes and crews, replant it, provide years of intensive care to make sure it survives the shock of transplanting. David had done this kind of work before. He knew the numbers. For a tree the size of my smallest walnut, you were looking at $60,000. Minimum. For the largest one, probably closer to $80,000 or $90,000. 5 trees, $60,000 each as a conservative average. $300,000. That was the actual damage. The real cost of replacing what Brad had destroyed. Tom took David's report and did something beautiful with it. He filed a lawsuit, not for $2,500, not for $15,000, for $300,000 in actual damages, plus treble damages for willful destruction, plus legal fees, plus loss of property value, plus loss of use. The total came to just over $900,000. $900,000 for cutting down 5 trees. Brad thought he was playing checkers. Tom showed him we were playing chess, and he was already in checkmate. He just did not know it yet. But the real masterstroke was not the lawsuit itself. It was the timing. Tom did some digging, made some calls, found out that Brad had a closing scheduled on his McMansion. 2 days away. Cash buyer. The deal that was supposed to make him rich. The payoff for all his corner cutting and cheap materials and calculated cruelty. Tom filed a lawsuit and immediately recorded something called a lease pendens. I had never heard the term before. It is Latin, means pending litigation. It is a public notice that gets attached to a property title, warning anyone who might want to buy or finance that property that there's an active legal dispute involving it. Tom explained it to me like this. Imagine you are about to buy a house. You are getting a mortgage. The bank is about to loan you $1 million. Then they find out that there's a lawsuit claiming the seller owes someone nearly $1 million, and that if the plaintiff wins, they can put a lien on the property to collect. What does the bank do? They walk away. Immediately, no bank will touch a property with a lease pendens. No title insurance company will insure it. The property becomes radioactive, untouchable, frozen. It is the nuclear option in real estate, a poison pill, a kill switch, and we had just activated on Brad's house. Tom filed the paperwork on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, it was recorded in the county records. Public information, visible to anyone doing a title search. Wednesday morning, Tom's phone rang. It was Brad's real estate attorney, asking what the hell was going on. Tom explained very calmly and professionally that his client had filed a legitimate lawsuit for damages and had recorded a lease pendens to protect his interests pending resolution of the case. The real estate attorney asked if we would consider releasing the lease pendens if Brad paid some kind of settlement. Tom said we would consider any reasonable offer, but that my damages were well documented and substantial. Wednesday afternoon, Tom called me. He was trying not to laugh. The deal had fallen through. The buyer's bank had found the lease pendens during their final title review. They refused to fund the loan. The buyer, who was paying cash but still wanted title insurance, walked away when the insurance company said they would not cover it. $3 million. Gone. Evaporated. Because of a lawsuit and a piece of paper. Tom told me that Brad's house was now essentially unsellable. Not until the lawsuit was resolved. Could be months. Could be years. And every month that house sat empty, Brad was paying property taxes, insurance, and interest on whatever loans he had taken out to build it. The trap was closing. Thursday morning, my phone rang. A known number. I answered it. It was Brad. He was not calm. He was not smooth. He was screaming, incoherent. Something about how I was ruining him. How I had no right. How he was going to sue me for filing a frivolous lawsuit. How I would regret this. I let him rant. Did not interrupt. Just held the phone away from my ear a little and waited for him to run out of steam. When he finally stopped, there was this heavy breathing on the line. I could picture him, red-faced, sweating, realizing that yelling had not changed anything. Then his voice changed, got quieter, desperate. He told me he would pay me $50,000, cash, right now, today. Just dropped the lawsuit and released the lease pendens. I told him no. He went up to 75, then 100. His voice was shaking. I told him I was not selling anything. I told him I was not negotiating. I told him he had made this about math. So we were going to follow the math all the way to its conclusion. He asked me what I wanted. I told him the truth. I wanted him to understand that some things do not have a price tag, that honor is not optional, that when you give someone your word and then break it for money, there are consequences. I told him that he had calculated the cost of cutting down my trees, but he had forgotten to calculate the cost of making me his enemy. I told him I would see him in court. Then I hung up. Friday afternoon, Brad showed up at my house. I saw him coming down the driveway. He looked terrible, pale, unshaven, wearing a t-shirt and jeans instead of his usual peacock display. He was carrying a manila envelope. I met him at the door, did not invite him in, just stood there. He tried one more time, told me he had a cashier's check for $150,000 in the envelope, everything he could scrape together. He just needed me to drop the lawsuit, just give him a chance to close the deal. He would pay me the rest later. He promised. I looked at the envelope, looked at him, looked at the stump still visible in my yard behind him. I told him I had no interest in his promises. I had already seen what those were worth. He started crying, actually crying, told me I did not understand, told me he had borrowed money from private lenders. Hard money loans. The kind with interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. 20%. Compounding monthly. He had 90 days to pay them back or they would foreclose. He needed this sale. He needed it now. That is when I understood the full picture. Brad had not bought that land with his own money. He had leveraged himself to the hilt, borrowed from the kind of people who do not care about your problems, who just want their money back with interest or they take everything. He had built his entire scheme on the assumption that he could flip the house quickly, get in, get out, pocket the profit, pay back the hard money lenders before the interest ate him alive. It was a house of cards, a high wire act with no net, and I had just cut the wire. I told him that was not my problem. I told him he had made his choices, and now he got to live with them. I told him that maybe he should have thought about consequences before he cut down 80-year-old trees for a view. He left the envelope on my doorstep and walked away. I let it sit there for an hour before I finally picked it up and put it in a drawer. Never cashed the check. Kept it as evidence. The lawsuit took 4 months to get to court. Brad's attorney tried every delay tactic in the book. Tried to get the lease pendens released. Tried to argue that the damages were inflated. Tried to settle for less. Tom crushed every argument. David's expert testimony was bulletproof. The photographic evidence was overwhelming. The survey showed clearly that the trees were on my property. The fact that Brad had admitted to cutting them down on a recorded phone call his attorney had unwisely made to Tom sealed it. The judge was not amused. Not even a little bit. She was in her 60s. Old enough to remember when a handshake meant something. When people did not calculate their way around basic decency. She awarded me the full amount. $300,000 in actual damages, triple damages for willful destruction, legal fees, loss of property value. The works, $943,000. Brad's insurance company refused to pay. They pointed to the clause about intentional criminal acts. They said that willful destruction of property was not covered. Brad was on his own. He did not have $943,000. He did not have a tenth of that. Everything here was tied up in that unsold house and the hard money loans that were compounding daily. He declared bankruptcy, personal and business. The whole thing collapsed like a building with no foundation. The hard money lenders foreclosed on the house, put it up for auction to recover whatever they could. They needed a fast sale, needed to cut their losses. Tom told me about the auction, told me I could bid if I wanted. The opening bid was a joke. $300,000 for a house Brad had tried to sell for $3 million. The lenders just wanted out. I thought about it for exactly one night. Then I called Tom and told him to bid for me. Use part of my judgment as collateral. Give me that house. We got it for $320,000, a tenth of what Brad had thought it was worth. I became the owner of the McMansion on the hill. The first thing I did was walk through it, really look at it. See what Brad had built with all his corner cutting and cost saving and clever calculations. It was garbage. Beautiful garbage, but garbage nonetheless. The floors were already separating in places. The paint was cheap and already peeling. Behind one section of drywall that had cracked, I found mold, black mold, growing on studs that should have been treated. The foundation had stress fractures. The roof was already leaking. The electrical was barely code compliant. The plumbing rattled and banged like it was angry. Brad had built a stage set, something that looked impressive from the outside, but would start falling apart the moment someone actually tried to live in it. He had created the illusion of value with no substance beneath it, just like the man himself. I hired a demolition crew, told them to take it down to the foundation, haul it all away. Every piece of vinyl siding and fake stone and cheap drywall. Every corner that Brad had cut. Every lie he had built into those walls. It took them 3 days. 3 days to erase what Brad had spent 8 months building. The math of destruction is always faster than the math of creation. When they were done, I had 2 empty lots, mine and Brad's, for acres of raw land. The property line between them suddenly seemed pointless, arbitrary. I had the survey markers removed. It was all one piece now, one piece of land. the way it had probably been 100 years ago before someone decided to divide it up and sell it off in pieces. I spent the next month clearing the debris Brad had left behind, the gouges in the earth from his equipment, the compacted soil, the construction trash that had been buried instead of properly disposed of. It was like an archaeological dig, uncovering layers of shortcuts and carelessness. When the land was finally clean, I called David the arborist, told him I wanted to plant a tree, a black walnut. He told me that was good, told me it was right. He brought me a sapling, 2 feet tall, grown from seed. He showed me where to plant it, how deep, how to pack the soil, how to water it, how to give it the best chance of surviving. We planted it together on a Saturday morning in October. The sky was clear. The air was cool. Perfect planting weather. I knelt down next to that little tree after David left, pressed my hand into the soil around it, felt the earth that had been wounded and was now healing. This tree would not be full grown in my lifetime. It would not provide shade for my house or save me money on my electric bill. I would be long gone before it reached even a fraction of the size of the trees my father had planted. But someone would see it. Someone 50 years from now. Someone who would buy this land or inherit it or just pass by it. They would see a massive black walnut and wonder who planted it. They would sit in its shade and never know my name, but would benefit from a choice I made on a cool October morning when I decided to build something instead of just destroying something. That is the real math, the kind that does not fit on a spreadsheet, the kind that compounds over generations instead of quarters, the kind that measures value in decades and centuries instead of dollars and cents. Brad had told me it was just business, just math, a simple calculation of profit and loss. He was right that it was math. He was just using the wrong equation. He was thinking short-term, quarterly returns, immediate profit. He calculated that the value of the view was greater than the cost of the trees, and that was where his equation ended. But he forgot about time. He forgot about consequences. He forgot that some costs do not show up until later, and when they do, they come with interest. He forgot that in the real math of life, the kind that actually matters, reputation compounds, trust compounds, honor compounds, and so does betrayal. I heard later that Brad left the state, went somewhere out west, started over with nothing. I do not know if he learned anything. I do not know if he ever thought about those trees or that handshake or the moment he decided that his word was worth less than $200,000. I hope he did. I hope somewhere in his new life, when he is tempted to cut a corner or break a promise or calculate his way around doing the right thing, he remembers. He remembers that some equations eat you alive, that some debts come due in ways you do not see coming. That math, real math, the kind that governs how humans actually treat each other, does not care about your projections or your profit margins. It just cares about the balance. And the balance always comes due. I still live in the same house, the one my father built, the one that stood empty for 3 months while I was fighting Brad in court, the one that is now part of 4 acres instead of 2. The shade is gone. My electric bill went up just like I knew it would. The house gets hot in summer. I run the air conditioning more than I used to. It costs money. But every time I pay that bill, I think about the equation. I paid $943,000 in legal fees and time and stress. Got back $943,000 plus a house I demolished plus land I did not need. On paper, I broke even, maybe even lost money if you factor in opportunity cost and the value of 3 months of my life I will never get back. But I have something Brad never understood, something that does not show up on a balance sheet. I have peace. I can look at myself in the mirror. I can stand in my yard and know that when someone shook my hand and looked me in the eye and gave me their word, I honored it. And when someone broke their word to me, I held them accountable. That is worth more than any number Brad could have calculated. The little walnut is growing, slowly, the way trees do. I water it when it does not rain. I check on it every morning. Sometimes I just stand there and look at it, this small green thing that will outlive me by a century. My father planted 5 trees after a war, after seeing things that broke him in ways he never talked about. He came home and he built a house and he planted trees because that is what you do when you've seen destruction. You create something. You leave something behind that is better than what you found. I am doing the same thing. One small tree, one small act of creation in response to an act of destruction. It is not revenge. Revenge is destructive. This is restorative. This is the balance. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it. If I regret spending all that time and money and energy on a lawsuit over some trees, if it was worth it, I tell them yes. Every time, I would do it again, because it was never about the trees. But not just that, it was about the principle underneath it, the foundation that holds civilization together. You cannot have a society where people can shake your hand, look you in the eye, give you their word, and then break at the moment the math makes sense. You cannot build anything lasting on that foundation. It is quicksand. It is rot. Someone has to hold the line. Someone has to say that honor is not optional, that trust is not a luxury, that your word actually means something, or we are all just animals pretending to be civilized. Brad wanted to play by numbers, so we played by numbers. We just used the right equation. I walk out to that little tree most mornings now, usually with my coffee. My dog comes with me. He does not understand what the tree means. He just knows I like to stop there, so he stops too. The tree is growing, slowly, patiently, the way real things grow. Not fast, not explosive, not in a hurry to prove anything. Just steady, just upward, just alive. In 50 years, someone will sit in its shade and never know my name, never know about Brad, never know about lawsuits and lease pendants and treble damages. They will just know that someone once planted a tree, and they will be grateful for the shade. That is the real business. That is the real math. That is what you leave behind when equations finally balance and the lawyers go home and the dust settles. Not what you took, what you gave. Not what you calculated, what you created. Not the profit you made, the shade you left. Brad thought it was just business, just math, just a simple calculation. He was right. It was math. He was just terrible at it.